The dust-laden wind carried the sound of hushed whispers and judgment as Aurora Vance clutched her swollen belly, tears streaming down her face as the town council of Kennewick, Montana Territory, delivered their cruel verdict in the spring of 1875. The congregation hall fell silent as Mayor Finch, with his bushy white mustache and cold eyes, banged his gavel one final time. Aurora Vance, you have brought shame upon this God-fearing community. For the sin of bearing a child without a husband, you are hereby banished from Kennewick. You have until sundown tomorrow to gather your belongings and leave, never to return. Aurora stood trembling, her 22 years of life seemingly crashing down around her. The daughter of the town's former doctor, she had once been respected, even admired for her knowledge of healing herbs and gentle way with the sick. Now she was nothing but a fallen woman in their eyes. Please, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. Where am I to go? Winter is barely past. I have nowhere. That should have been a consideration before your indiscretion, Mrs. Pembroke, the banker's wife, said with a sneer. Perhaps the child's father could offer assistance. Oh, that's right, you refuse to name him. Aurora's hands protectively covered her belly. She would never tell them that Thomas Blackwell, the mayor's son-in-law, had forced himself upon her that night 6 months ago when she'd been returning from delivering medicine to the Jenkins farm. She would never tell them how he had threatened her family if she spoke out, and now Thomas sat smugly beside his wife in the third row, secure in the knowledge that his position protected him. The decision is final, Mayor Finch declared. Sundown tomorrow. As the townspeople filed out, some casting pitying glances her way while others averted their eyes in disgust, Aurora remained standing alone, her world shattered. Later that evening, Aurora sat in her small bedroom in the house she shared with her ailing mother. Her father had died 2 years prior, leaving them with little more than the house and his medical books. Now, with her mother's consumption worsening and Aurora's own condition, they had been barely scraping by on Aurora's work as a midwife's assistant and herbalist. They cannot do this to you, her mother, Eleanor, whispered hoarsely from her bed. This is our home. Aurora gently placed a cool cloth on her mother's forehead. They've made their decision, Mama, but I won't leave you. We'll go together. Eleanor grabbed her daughter's hand with surprising strength. No, Aurora, I would only slow you down. I've written to my sister in Helena. She'll take me in. But your health is beyond recovery, my darling. We both know it. Eleanor's eyes, though tired, were clear and determined. You must think of the child now, your child. Aurora's throat tightened as she swallowed back tears. How will I survive? You're stronger than you know, Eleanor said, squeezing her daughter's hand. Pack your father's medical bag, take his books and the herbs from the garden. Your knowledge is your greatest asset now. As dawn broke the next morning, Aurora had packed 2 saddle bags with everything she could carry: clothing, dried food, her father's medical supplies, and a small pouch of coins her mother had hidden away. The plan was for her to travel west, toward the mountains where a small settlement called Willow Creek might offer refuge. Aurora helped her mother into a wagon driven by their neighbor, Mrs. Collins, who had agreed to take Eleanor to the stagecoach bound for Helena. I'll write as soon as I'm settled somewhere, Aurora promised, trying to be brave as she embraced her mother one last time. God will guide you, my sweet girl, Eleanor whispered, cupping Aurora's face. And remember, there is no shame in love. Your child is a blessing, not a burden. With those words echoing in her mind, Aurora mounted the aging mare she'd purchased with the last of her savings and headed west out of Kennewick, her heart heavy but her resolve strengthening with every mile. The journey was arduous for a woman in her condition. By the 3rd day, Aurora's back ached fiercely, and she knew she needed to find shelter soon. The spring weather was unpredictable, with clear skies giving way to sudden, drenching downpours. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and Aurora urged her mare toward a stand of cottonwoods in the distance, hoping to find some protection from the coming storm. As she approached, she noticed smoke rising from a small cabin partially hidden by the trees. Desperation outweighing caution, Aurora guided her horse toward it, praying for a kind soul who might offer temporary refuge. The cabin was modest but well maintained, with a small corral containing 3 horses and a vegetable garden beginning to sprout behind it. As Aurora approached, a tall figure emerged from the barn carrying a saddle. "Hello, the house," she called out, her voice nearly carried away by the rising wind. The man straightened, setting down the saddle. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and a weather-worn face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His expression registered surprise as he took in the sight of a heavily pregnant woman alone on the trail. "Madam," he called back, approaching cautiously. "Are you lost?" Aurora swallowed her pride. "No, sir, I was hoping. There's a storm coming, and I wondered if I might take shelter in your barn until it passes." The man's gaze traveled from her face to her swollen belly and back again. Instead of the judgment she expected, she saw only concern. "The barn's no place for you, madam. Come inside the house. Storm's going to be a bad one." Relief flooded through Aurora as she dismounted, somewhat awkwardly due to her condition. The man stepped forward quickly to offer assistance, his strong hands steady at her elbow. "I'm Garrett Hayes," he said simply. "Let me take your horse, Aurora Vance. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Hayes." As if on cue, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. Garrett led her to the porch while taking the reins of her mare. "Get yourself inside and dry. Doors unlocked. I'll see to your horse and be right in." The cabin interior was modest but surprisingly neat. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small table and 2 chairs beside it. Simple shelves held books and household necessities, while a curtained-off area presumably concealed a bed. Aurora stood dripping on the plank floor, unsure what to do. Minutes later, Garrett returned, shaking water from his hat before hanging it on a peg by the door. Without the hat shadowing his features, Aurora could see him clearly for the first time. His hair was the color of dark honey, his face tanned from outdoor work, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled often. But it was those eyes that caught her attention, a deep blue-green, like mountain lakes she'd seen as a child. "Let me build up that fire," he said, moving to the hearth. "You're soaked through." "I don't want to impose," Aurora began, but a sudden sharp pain in her lower back made her gasp, her hand flying to her belly. Garrett was at her side instantly. "How far along are you?" "Nearly 7 months," she admitted, his expression turned serious. "And you're traveling alone." "Where's your husband?" The dreaded question. Aurora looked away. "There is no husband." She braced herself for the disgust, the immediate change in his demeanor. Instead, Garrett simply nodded and guided her to a chair near the fire. "Sit, rest. I've got some stew on the back of the stove." "When's the last time you ate properly?" The unexpected kindness nearly undid her. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. While Garrett stirred the pot and added wood to the fire, Aurora explained her situation, though she omitted the details about Thomas, saying only that the town had banished her for her condition. "Kennewick," Garrett said with a frown. "That doesn't surprise me, bunch of hypocrites in that town." "You know it?" Aurora asked, accepting the bowl of rabbit stew he offered, passed through a few times, never felt welcome. He pulled the second chair across from her. "Where were you headed?" "Willow Creek. I heard they need someone with medical knowledge." Garrett's expression changed. "Willow Creek's gone, madam. Flood took most of it last year. Few families remain, but they're scattered now." Aurora's spoon clattered against the bowl. "Gone, but I have nowhere else." The storm raged outside, matching the turmoil in her heart. Her carefully laid plans, meager as they were, had just collapsed. "You can stay here until the weather clears," Garrett offered. "After that, we'll figure something out." "Why are you helping me?" Aurora couldn't help asking. "Most would have turned me away." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the flames. "My sister was in a similar situation once. Town she was in drove her out. She didn't survive the winter, nor did her child." His jaw tightened. I won't see that happen again, not if I can help it. That night, Garrett insisted Aurora take his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, she lay awake listening to the rain pound against the roof, wondering what twist of fate had led her to this cabin and this unexpectedly kind man. The storm continued for 3 days, trapping them together in the small cabin. Aurora discovered that Garrett was a horse trainer who worked mainly for the larger ranches in the territory, but valued his independence too much to become a permanent ranch hand. He had built this cabin himself 5 years ago, choosing this isolated spot for its good water and grazing land. During those days, Aurora found herself regaining strength. She insisted on helping with cooking, and even showed Garrett how to use some of the medicinal herbs she carried when he mentioned a recurring pain in his shoulder from an old injury. "That feels better than anything the doctor in Fort Benton gave me," he admitted after she applied a warm poultice. "My father was a doctor," Aurora explained. "He taught me everything he knew, though I never had formal training." On the 4th morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Aurora stood on the porch, breathing in the fresh, rain-washed air, knowing it was time to move on but having no clear destination. Garrett joined her, leaning against the porch post. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "There's a small settlement about 30 miles west of here. Miner's Rest, they call it. Nothing fancy, but they've got families, a general store, no doctor though." Aurora turned to him, hope fluttering in her chest. "You think they might need someone with medical knowledge? I know they would. Lost a man last winter because the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away." He hesitated. "I need to deliver some horses to the Double Bar Ranch, which is about 10 miles past Miner's Rest. I could escort you there if you'd like." The offer was practical, not romantic, but Aurora felt warmed by it nonetheless. "I would be grateful, Mr. Hayes." "Garrett," he corrected with a small smile. "After sharing a cabin for 4 days, I reckon we can use first names, Miss Vance." "Aurora," she replied, returning his smile. They set out the next morning, traveling at an easy pace to accommodate Aurora's condition. Garrett had loaded her belongings onto a gentle pack mule, insisting she ride his most reliable mare instead of her older one. "She's got a smoother gait," he explained. "Easier on your back." The journey took 3 days, during which they fell into a comfortable routine. Garrett was quiet by nature, but not unfriendly. He pointed out landmarks, taught her how to spot game trails, and each night made sure she had the most comfortable spot by the campfire. On the evening of the 2nd day, as they ate a rabbit Garrett had snared, Aurora caught him watching her with an unreadable expression. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just thinking it's a strange world where men who abandon their responsibilities are welcomed in society, while women bearing the consequences alone are cast out." Aurora looked down at her plate. "The father," she began, then stopped. She had never spoken of that night to anyone. "It wasn't what you might think." Garrett's expression darkened. "Was it forced?" The simple question, asked without judgment, broke something open inside her. Before she knew it, Aurora was telling him everything about Thomas, the attack, the threats afterward. When she finished, Garrett's hands were clenched into fists, but his voice was gentle. "You should have been protected, not punished." "It doesn't matter now," Aurora said, though the words tasted bitter. "What's done is done." "It matters," Garrett insisted. "It matters that you know not everyone thinks like those fools in Kennewick." That night, Aurora slept more peacefully than she had in months, as if sharing her burden had lightened it somehow. By midday on the 3rd day, they reached Miner's Rest. It was indeed small, perhaps 20 buildings clustered around a main street, with scattered cabins on the outskirts. Not so different from Kennewick in size, but lacking its pretensions to grandeur. Garrett led them to a 2-story building with Russell's General Store and Boarding House painted on a wooden sign. A bell jangled as they entered, and a round-faced woman with gray-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter. "Garrett Hayes. Didn't expect to see you before summer." Her curious gaze moved to Aurora. "And who might this be, Mrs. Russell?" "This is Aurora Vance. She's a healer trained by her doctor father. She's looking for a place that might need her skills." Mrs. Russell's face lit up. "A healer? Why, that's an answer to prayer if I ever heard one." She hurried around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "After we lost poor Mr. Jenkins this winter, folks have been saying we need someone with medical knowledge. Can you deliver babies too?" Aurora nodded. "I assisted with many births in my hometown." Mrs. Russell beamed. "Well then, you must stay. We've got a room upstairs you can have, fair price too. And there's a small cabin at the edge of town that's been empty since old Doc Miller passed 2 years back. It needs work, but it's got space for seeing patients." It seemed almost too good to be true. Aurora glanced at Garrett, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I would be very grateful," Aurora said. "But I should be honest with you, Mrs. Russell. I'm not married, and as you can see—" She gestured to her belly. Mrs. Russell waved a dismissive hand. "Child, half the women in this settlement came here running from something or someone. We don't ask many questions. Can you heal? That's what matters." Relief washed over Aurora. "Yes, madam, I can heal." "Then welcome to Miner's Rest." After securing Aurora a room, Garrett reluctantly mentioned that he needed to continue to the Double Bar Ranch to deliver the horses. "I'll be back in about a week," he promised as they stood outside the boarding house. "Just want to make sure you're settling in all right." "You've done more than enough," Aurora assured him, though she felt a surprising pang at the thought of his departure. "I'll be fine." Garrett studied her face for a moment. "I believe you will be," he said finally. "You're stronger than you know, Aurora Vance." With that, he tipped his hat and mounted his horse, leading the string of animals he was delivering. Aurora watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road, wondering why she felt as though something important was riding away with him. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Word spread quickly that a healer had arrived in Miner's Rest, and Aurora soon found herself treating everything from a miner's infected hand to a child's cough. Mrs. Russell proved to be a fountain of information about the town and its inhabitants, introducing Aurora to families who might need her services. Several of the women, upon learning of Aurora's condition, brought baby clothes and offers of assistance when her time came. Their acceptance was a balm to her wounded spirit. With her first earnings, Aurora began purchasing supplies to restock her father's medical bag. The old cabin Mrs. Russell had mentioned needed considerable work, but the miners offered to help with repairs in exchange for medical treatment. "You're good for this town," Mrs. Russell declared one evening as Aurora sipped tea in the older woman's kitchen. "Folks are already talking about how gentle your touch is, how you don't put on airs like that doctor from Helena who visits twice a year and charges a fortune." "I'm grateful they've accepted me," Aurora admitted. "It's more than I dared hope for." "Well, not everyone's blind to genuine goodness," Mrs. Russell said, giving Aurora's hand a pat. "Speaking of which, that Garrett Hayes came back today, saw him at the livery stable." Aurora's heart gave an unexpected leap. He mentioned he might return. Mrs. Russell's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Did he now? Well, he's a good man, Garrett is. Keeps to himself mostly, but always fair in his dealings. Never known him to escort a lady to town before, though." Aurora felt her cheeks warm. "He was simply being kind, Mrs. Russell hummed, clearly unconvinced. "Well, he asked after you, said he might call tomorrow if you weren't too busy." That night, Aurora found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her long auburn hair more neatly than usual, and choosing her best dress, one of the few that still accommodated her growing belly. Garrett arrived mid-morning, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the boarding house parlor. "You look well," he said by way of greeting. "Town seems to be treating you right. Better than I could have imagined," Aurora confirmed. "I've had patients every day. Mr. Simmons is even helping repair the old doctor's cabin, so I'll have a proper place to practice." Garrett nodded, seeming pleased. "I thought this might be a good fit for you." I owe you a great debt, Aurora said earnestly. If you hadn't taken me in during that storm. No debt between friends, Garrett interrupted. He hesitated, then added, I brought something for you. From his saddlebag, he produced a small, carved wooden cradle. Made it while I was at the double bar. Owner's wife had a new baby, got me thinking. Aurora's fingers traced the smooth, polished wood. It was beautifully made, with delicate leaf patterns carved along the sides. Garrett, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. His eyes met hers, something warm and unspoken passing between them. I was wondering if you might like to see that cabin they're fixing up for you. I could offer an opinion on the repairs if you'd like. The old cabin was indeed in need of work, but Aurora could see its potential. The main room was spacious enough to serve as a treatment area, while two smaller rooms in the back would make a comfortable living space. Once they fix that roof and shore up the north wall, it'll be solid, Garrett observed, walking around the perimeter. Good chimney, too. You'll be warm enough come winter. Winter seems far away, Aurora said, one hand absently rubbing her belly. Garrett's gaze followed the movement. How much longer? About 2 months, the midwife in Kennewick said. He nodded thoughtfully. I'll be back before then. Got another job delivering horses to Fort Benton, but I should return in about 3 weeks. Aurora felt a flutter that had nothing to do with the baby. You don't need to worry about me. I know I don't need to. His voice was soft, but I find that I want to. Over the following weeks, Aurora became an integral part of Miner's Rest. The cabin repairs progressed quickly with so many willing hands, and by the time Garrett returned from Fort Benton, she had moved in and set up a proper examination area in the main room. True to his word, Garrett returned 3 weeks later. This time, he brought wood for shelving, which he installed himself over the course of 2 days. Aurora couldn't help but notice how the townspeople greeted him warmly, as if he were becoming a familiar presence. You seem to be visiting Miner's Rest more frequently these days, she observed as they shared supper in her new home. Mrs. Russell says you used to pass through only once or twice a year. Garrett's mouth quirked in a half smile. Mrs. Russell notices too much. He busied himself with his plate for a moment before adding, I've been offered steady work with the stage company, breaking horses for their line. Would mean I'd be based out of Fort Collins, but traveling this route regular. That sounds like a good opportunity, Aurora said carefully, noting the way he seemed to be gauging her reaction. Would put me through Miner's Rest every couple of weeks, he continued. If you think that might be welcome, Aurora felt her heart quicken. I think that would be very welcome indeed. The look that passed between them held promise, but both knew there were complications to consider, not least the child Aurora carried, fathered by another man under the worst circumstances. As if reading her thoughts, Garrett spoke quietly. Aurora, I want you to know that I see you not just your circumstances. I see a woman of courage and kindness. Whatever happens between us or doesn't happen, that won't change. Tears pricked at Aurora's eyes. Thank you for seeing me, she whispered. Garrett reached across the table and, for the first time, took her hand in his. They sat like that, connected by that simple touch until the fire burned low in the grate. The following weeks established a pattern. Garrett would arrive in Miner's Rest, stay for a few days working with horses for the stage company, and spend his evenings with Aurora. They took slow walks through town, shared meals, and talked long into the night. Gradually, Aurora began to recognize the warmth building between them for what it was, the beginning of love. As her time grew nearer, the women of Miner's Rest rallied around her. Mrs. Russell insisted on staying at the cabin several nights a week, just in case, while others brought meals and baby supplies. Aurora was moved by their generosity, so different from the condemnation she had faced in Kennewick. Garrett, too, showed his care in practical ways. He built a rocking chair for her porch, hauled extra firewood, and made sure the cabin was as comfortable as possible. You don't have to do all this, Aurora protested one afternoon as he fixed a squeaky hinge on her door. I know, he replied simply. I want to. It was early September when Aurora's labor began, earlier than expected. Mrs. Russell sent a boy running for Mrs. Lawson, the town's most experienced midwife, while she helped Aurora to bed. The labor was long and difficult. By nightfall, Aurora was exhausted, her strength flagging. Outside, Garrett paced the porch, having been firmly shooed away by Mrs. Lawson hours earlier. "You need to fight, girl," Mrs. Lawson urged as Aurora's contractions intensified. "This baby needs you strong." "I can't," Aurora gasped, pain tearing through her. "I can't do this alone." The door opened and Garrett's voice filled the room. "You're not alone, Aurora. You'll never be alone again." Mrs. Lawson turned, ready to order him out, but the determination in his face gave her pause. "Let him stay," Aurora whispered. "Please." With a nod, Mrs. Lawson relented. Garrett moved to Aurora's side, taking her hand in his strong grip. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady even as his eyes revealed his concern. "We'll do this together." With Garrett supporting her, Aurora found new reserves of strength. As dawn broke over the mountains, a strong cry filled the cabin. Her daughter had arrived. "She's perfect," Mrs. Lawson announced, placing the swaddled infant in Aurora's arms. "Healthy as can be." Aurora gazed down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by love. "Hello, Eleanor," she whispered, naming her daughter after her mother, who had passed away in Helena just a month earlier. Garrett stood beside the bed, his expression a mixture of awe and tenderness. "She's beautiful," he murmured, "just like her mother," as Mrs. Lawson and Mrs. Russell quietly left the room to give them privacy. Garrett sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Aurora," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I know this might not be the right time, but I need you to know something. These past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your heart, I've fallen in love with you." Aurora's eyes filled with tears. "Garrett, you don't need to say anything now," he rushed on. "I know you've been through so much, and little Eleanor has just arrived. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to build a life with you both." Aurora reached for his hand, placing it gently on Eleanor's swaddled form. "We're already building that life, I think, and I love you too, Garrett Hayes." The kiss they shared was gentle, full of promise, and the knowledge that their journey together was just beginning. Over the next weeks, Garrett became a constant presence in the cabin. Though he still had work with the stage company, he arranged to be in Miner's Rest more often, gradually moving his belongings from his remote cabin to Aurora's. Little Eleanor thrived under their care, growing stronger each day. The people of Miner's Rest treated her as one of their own, with no stigma attached to her birth. Aurora's practice continued to flourish, with patients coming from as far as 20 miles away to seek her healing skills. As winter approached, Garrett raised the subject that had been on both their minds. "I'd like us to marry before the first snow," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, Eleanor sleeping peacefully in her carved cradle. "If you're willing." Aurora smiled, her heart full. "More than willing." "People will talk," he warned. "They'll say I'm taking on another man's child." "Does that bother you?" Aurora asked, though she already knew the answer. Garrett shook his head firmly. "Eleanor is yours, which makes her mine too, in all the ways that matter. The rest is just noise." They were married on a crisp October day, with most of the town in attendance. The ceremony was simple, held in the newly built community hall, with Mrs. Russell proudly holding Eleanor. As they spoke their vows, Aurora marveled at the journey that had brought her here from banishment and despair to love and community. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett's kiss held all the promise of their future together. That night, after Eleanor had been fed and settled in her cradle, husband and wife stood on their porch looking at the stars scattered across the Montana sky. "I never thought I'd find this," Aurora admitted, leaning into Garrett's embrace. "A home, acceptance, love." "Sometimes the worst storms lead us exactly where we need to be," Garrett replied, his arms tightening around her. "I thank God every day for that rainstorm that brought you to my door. And I thank God for a man who saw beyond judgment to the truth," Aurora said, turning in his arms to face him. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. His kiss was tender, but held a hint of the passion they would soon share. You were never invisible, Aurora Hayes. You've always shone brighter than anyone I've ever known. As the first snowflakes began to fall, they went inside to their daughter, to the warmth of their home, to the life they were building together, a life founded on second chances, and the promise that neither of them would ever have to face the world alone again. Spring came to Miners Rest in a rush of green and wildflowers, bringing with it renewal and hope. Eleanor, now 7 months old, was sitting up and reaching for everything in sight, her laughter a constant delight in the Hayes household. Aurora's healing practice had grown so busy that Garrett had built an addition to the cabin, a proper waiting area for patients, and a separate examination room. The people of Miners Rest and the surrounding homesteads had come to rely on Doc Aurora, as they called her, for everything from birthing babies to setting broken bones. Garrett, true to his word, had settled into a rhythm of working with the stage company horses while building their life together. He had a natural way with Eleanor, who would squeal with delight whenever he entered the room. Though not her blood father, he had become her father in every way that mattered. One evening in late April, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Garrett broached a subject that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about our future," he began, his fingers laced with Aurora's. "The stage companies offered me a permanent position as their head horse trainer, would mean we'd have steady income security." "That sounds wonderful," Aurora said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "There's more," he continued. "Been saving to buy that parcel of land just north of town, the one with the stream running through it. 20 acres, enough for a proper house, some horses of my own, maybe even a few cattle." Aurora sat up, looking at him in surprise. "Garrett, you never mentioned wanting your own ranch," he shrugged, a little self-conscious. "Never had a reason to put down roots before, now I do." His gaze moved to Eleanor, who was playing with wooden blocks on a blanket at their feet. "I want to build something that will last, for her, for us." "And for any brothers or sisters she might have," Aurora asked softly. Garrett's eyes widened slightly. "Are you saying?" Aurora nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Winters confirmed it when he passed through last week. Late October, he thinks." Garrett let out a whoop that startled Eleanor, then swept Aurora into his arms, spinning her around on the porch. "Careful," she laughed. "I'm not as light as I used to be." "You're perfect," he declared, setting her down gently before dropping to one knee to tell Eleanor she would be a big sister. The land purchase was completed by June, and construction on their new home began immediately. The whole town seemed invested in the project, with miners offering to help on their days off and women bringing food to the workers. "You two have brought a lot of good to this place," Mr. Russell, the general store owner, told Garrett as they raised a beam for the main house. "Town wasn't the same before you came." "Think you've got that backwards," Garrett replied. "This town gave Aurora a chance when she needed it most." By August, the main structure of the house was complete, a sturdy 2-story home with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Aurora supervised the finishing touches while continuing to see patients in their cabin in town, which they planned to maintain as her medical office. One evening, as Garrett was finishing the nursery for their coming child, he found Aurora standing in the doorway, her expression troubled. "What is it?" he asked, setting down his tools. "A letter came today," she said, holding out a folded paper. "From Kennewick." Garrett's expression hardened. "What do they want?" "It's from Sarah Pembroke. She was a friend once. She says my mother's sister passed away last month." "I'm sorry, Aurora." "There's more. The town is suffering. They've had no doctor since my father died, and now there's sickness, scarlet fever, she thinks. Children have died. She's asking if I would consider returning just long enough to help." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "And do you want to return?" Aurora sighed, resting a hand on her growing belly. "These are people who cast me out when I was most vulnerable, who treated me as if I were nothing." Her eyes met his. but they're also people suffering, children who had no part in what happened to me. Whatever you decide, I'm with you, Garrett said firmly. If you want to go to Kennewick, we'll go together. The decision wasn't made lightly. They discussed it for days, weighing the risks against their conscience. Finally, Aurora made her choice. We'll go, she said. Not for those who judged me, but for those who need help. They made preparations quickly. Aurora arranged for Dr. Winters to visit miners' rest in their absence, while Garrett secured a sturdy wagon for the journey. Mrs. Russell insisted on keeping Alina with her. A wagon journey is no place for a baby, especially with sickness where you're headed. Though it pained them to leave their daughter, they knew it was the safest choice. With promises to return within a month, they set out for Kennewick in early September. The journey took 4 days, with Aurora growing quieter as familiar landmarks appeared. When the town finally came into view, she gripped Garrett's hand tightly. I never thought I'd see this place again, she whispered. Kennewick appeared much as she remembered it, though perhaps less imposing than in her memory. As their wagon rolled down the main street, heads turned. Whispers followed them like ripples in a pond. They stopped at the small hotel, where the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, clearly recognized Aurora but said nothing beyond. Rooms ready for you, madam, sir. Sarah Pembroke arrived within the hour, her face showing relief despite the obvious awkwardness. Aurora, thank you for coming, she said, hovering in the doorway as if uncertain of her welcome. I know you had every reason to ignore my letter. Tell me about the sickness, Aurora replied, all business. Sarah explained that the fever had started among the school children 2 weeks earlier. 5 had already died, and at least 20 more were ill, along with several adults. The nearest doctor was in Helena, too far to be of immediate help. We've set up a makeshift hospital in the church, Sarah concluded. People are desperate. Aurora nodded briskly. I'll need clean water, plenty of it, linens. My husband will help me unpack my supplies and will come directly. Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the word husband, her gaze moving to Garrett, who stood protectively behind Aurora. Of course, she murmured. Thank you. When she had gone, Garrett pulled Aurora into his arms. Are you all right? Better than I expected, she admitted. It feels different being here now, with you, as if they have no power over me anymore. The church had indeed been transformed into a ward, with pallets lining the floor. The smell of sickness hung heavy in the air, mingled with fear and exhaustion. As Aurora entered, heads turned. She recognized many faces, some who had shown kindness, others who had turned away. Mayor Finch approached, his face gray with fatigue. He had aged considerably in the year since Aurora had seen him last. Miss Vance, he began, then corrected himself. Mrs. Hayes, Garrett supplied, his hand steady on Aurora's back. My wife has come to help your sick, Mayor. I suggest we dispense with formalities and get to work. For the next 2 weeks, Aurora worked tirelessly, drawing on everything her father had taught her. She prescribed cool baths for the fever, herbal teas for the throat, poultices for the chest. She taught the women of the town how to prevent the spread of infection and how to recognize the early signs of the disease. Garrett worked alongside her, carrying water, changing bedding, comforting frightened children. The townspeople watched with a mixture of gratitude and shame as this couple one they had cast out, when a stranger fought to save their community. Gradually, the tide turned. Children began to recover. New cases became fewer. Hope returned to Kennewick. One evening, as Aurora was checking on her youngest patient, 4-year-old Lucy Wheeler, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Thomas Blackwell's wife, Margaret, standing there. Mrs. Blackwell, Aurora acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Hayes, Margaret replied. She looked thinner than Aurora remembered, her eyes shadowed. I wanted to thank you. Lucy is my niece. Aurora nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude from this woman whose husband had assaulted her. I also wanted to say. Margaret hesitated. Thomas is gone. He left town 6 months ago after. She took a deep breath. After I finally believed the rumors about what he had done to you and other women. Aurora stared at her, speechless. I was blind, Margaret continued, or perhaps I chose not to see. Either way, I owe you an apology that can never be adequate. Before Aurora could respond, there was a commotion at the church doors. Garrett entered, his expression urgent. Aurora, a message from Miner's Rest. Eleanor has a fever. The world seemed to stop. Aurora felt as though she couldn't breathe. We need to leave. Now, she said, gathering her wits. The patients in Kennewick were recovering. Her own child needed her. Word spread quickly. Within an hour, their wagon was ready, provisioned for the journey. To Aurora's surprise, Mayor Finch himself appeared as they were preparing to depart. Mrs. Hayes, he said formally, on behalf of Kennewick, I want to express our deepest gratitude for your assistance during our time of need. He paused, visibly struggling. And our deepest regret for how you were treated. It was unjust. Aurora looked at the man who had banished her, seeing now an old man humbled by circumstances. I didn't come for your gratitude or your regret, Mayor Finch, she said evenly. I came because children were suffering. Remember that the next time you sit in judgment of someone. With that, Garrett helped her into the wagon, and they set off at a pace far quicker than their journey to Kennewick. The return trip was a blur of anxiety. Aurora prayed constantly, terrified of what they might find when they reached Miner's Rest. Garrett pushed the horses as hard as he dared, stopping only when absolutely necessary. They arrived at their cabin on the second day, where Mrs. Russell met them with Eleanor in her arms. The fever broke this morning, she announced as Aurora rushed forward. She's been asking for her mama. Aurora took her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she felt the child's cool forehead. Eleanor smiled weakly, reaching up to touch her mother's cheek. My brave girl, Aurora whispered, holding her close as Garrett enfolded them both in his embrace. That night, with Eleanor sleeping peacefully between them in their bed, Aurora finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened in Kennewick. They were sorry, she said quietly. Or at least some of them were. Does that matter to you? Garrett asked, his hand gently stroking her hair. Aurora considered the question. Not in the way I thought it might. I didn't need their apology to heal. That happened here with you, with Eleanor, with this community that accepted me as I am. Garrett nodded, understanding. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person at all. Exactly, Aurora murmured. I've forgiven them not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. By November, life had returned to its rhythm. Their new home was complete, and they moved in just in time to welcome their son, Samuel, who arrived on a cold, clear night with his father pacing nervously outside the bedroom door until Mrs. Lawson invited him in to meet his boy. He has your eyes, Aurora said softly as Garrett cradled his newborn son. Eleanor, nearly 14 months old now, peered curiously at her brother from her perch on the bed beside her mother. And your strength, I'd wager, Garrett replied, his voice thick with emotion. As winter settled over Miner's Rest, the Hayes family established new traditions. Aurora continued her medical practice, though she limited her hours to spend time with her children. Garrett's work with the stage company provided stability, while his small herd of horses was beginning to gain a reputation for quality. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, they hosted a gathering for their closest friends, the Russells, the Lawsons, and several others who had become like family. Their home was warm with firelight and laughter, the air rich with the scent of pine and cinnamon. After their guests had departed and the children were asleep, Aurora and Garrett stood by their bedroom window, looking out at the moonlight reflecting off the snow. I received a letter today, Aurora said, leaning back against her husband's chest. From Sarah Pembroke. The town council in Kennewick has voted to formally rescind my banishment. She gave a small laugh. As if that matters now. Garrett's arms tightened around her. Does it bring you closure? In a way, she admitted. But my life isn't there anymore, it's here. She turned in his arms, her gaze meeting his. With you, with our children, with the future we're building. Garrett brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender. When you stumbled upon my cabin that day, I had no idea you would change my life so completely. Nor I yours, Aurora replied. I was so lost, so afraid. And now, her smile was radiant. Now I am found, now I am home. Their kiss was a promise renewed, a testament to the journey that had brought them together, and the bond that would carry them forward through all the seasons of their lives. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, a clean slate, a fresh beginning, a reminder that even in the harshest winter, spring always returns. 5 years passed, bringing both joy and challenges to the Hayes family. Their homestead flourished, with Garrett's horse breeding business gaining recognition throughout the territory. Aurora maintained her medical practice in town, training a young woman named Clara as her assistant. Eleanor, now 6, was a spirited child with her mother's auburn hair and healing touch, already showing interest in Aurora's medical books. Samuel, at 5, was his father's shadow, solemn and steady for his age. They had welcomed another daughter, Grace, 2 years earlier a surprise blessing who completed their family. Miner's Rest had grown considerably, now boasting a proper school, a larger general store, and even a small hotel for travelers on the stage line. The Hayes family was well respected, with both Aurora and Garrett serving on various town committees. Life had fallen into a comfortable pattern, but change was on the horizon. The railroad was coming, bringing with it opportunities and challenges. Already, surveyors had been through the area, marking the path the tracks would take. It'll change everything, Garrett remarked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the children play in the yard. Town's already growing faster than anyone expected. Aurora nodded, rocking Grace on her lap. Mrs. Russell says they're talking about establishing a proper hospital. They've asked if I'd consider heading it. Garrett turned to her, surprise evident on his face. You never mentioned that. I've been considering it, she admitted. It would mean more responsibility, but also the chance to help more people, maybe even bring in another doctor. You should do it, Garrett said without hesitation. No one deserves it more. Aurora smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. What about you? Jenkins mentioned you might be interested in his livery business. He's looking to retire soon. Garrett leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. Been thinking about it. Would mean less traveling, more time here with you and the children. Could combine it with my breeding stock, make something substantial to pass on to Samuel someday if he's interested. And if he's not, Aurora teased gently. Garrett chuckled. Then to whichever of our children wants it, or none of them, the important thing is giving them choices we never had. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Aurora found Garrett standing by the window in their bedroom, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. What are you thinking about so intently? She asked, coming to stand beside him. About how different our lives might have been, he replied, pulling her close. If that storm hadn't driven you to my cabin, if you hadn't had the courage to start over in a strange town, if you hadn't said those words that gave me hope when I needed it most, Aurora added softly. What words? You'll never be alone again, she quoted. You kept that promise, Garrett. He turned her to face him, his expression serious. And I always will. As spring turned to summer, decisions were made. Aurora accepted the position at the new hospital, which would be built by year's end. Garrett purchased the livery stable, expanding it to accommodate his growing business. The railroad construction brought new people to town, many of whom required medical attention after accidents on the line, keeping Aurora busier than ever. One particular patient would change the course of their lives yet again. Jacob Foster, a railroad engineer, was brought to Aurora with a badly broken leg after a construction accident. During his recovery, he spoke often of his wife and children back east, and of his hopes to bring them west once the line was complete. Montana's the future, he told Aurora during one of his treatments, but it needs people like you, educated, skilled. The company's looking to establish towns along the line. Good towns with schools and doctors, civilized places where families can thrive. Aurora listened with interest but thought little of it until Jacob returned months later, his family in tow and a proposition for both her and Garrett. The company's establishing a division 80 miles west of here, he explained over dinner at their home. Needs to be a substantial town, repair shops for the engines, housing for workers, all the services a growing community requires. They're calling it Hayes Crossing. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Quite a coincidence, that name. Jacob smiled. Not a coincidence at all. They've heard about Aurora's medical work, your reputation with horses. They're offering you both positions, Aurora as the town doctor with a proper hospital, Garrett to establish the livery operations and supply horses for the company. The offer was substantial, more money than they currently made, a large piece of land, the chance to help shape a new community from its very foundation. It's a lot to consider, Aurora said later that night as they discussed the proposition in private. We've built a life here. The children are settled, we have friends. True, Garrett acknowledged, but we built this life from nothing. We could do it again, and this time with resources behind us. He took her hands in his. What do you think, truly? Aurora considered carefully. I think we've always followed opportunity when it served our family's best interests, and this could be a remarkable opportunity for all of us. The decision wasn't made lightly. They discussed it with their children, with their friends in Miners' Rest, and with each other over many weeks. Finally, they agreed to visit Hayes Crossing before making their final choice. The journey took 2 days, with the children excited by the adventure. What they found was promising: a beautiful valley with a river running through it, construction already underway on key buildings, and a sense of possibility in the air. We can build something special here, Garrett said as they stood on a hill overlooking the site. Something that will last. Aurora watched Alina exploring nearby, pointing out plants to her younger siblings. The children would have opportunities we never dreamed of. By the time they returned to Miners' Rest, their decision was made. They would move to Hayes Crossing by spring, in time to establish themselves before the railroad's completion. The news was met with mixed emotions, in town sadness at losing them, but understanding of the opportunity. Mrs. Russell hugged Aurora tightly when told. You came here seeking refuge, the older woman said, eyes glistening. Now you go to build a refuge for others. I couldn't be prouder if you were my own daughter. Winter passed in a flurry of preparations. Garrett sold the livery business, but kept his best breeding stock to take to Hayes Crossing. Aurora trained Clara more intensively, ensuring she could handle most medical situations until a new doctor arrived. The children packed their treasured possessions with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Alina excited about the adventure. Samuel worried about leaving his friends. Little Grace too young to fully understand the change ahead. On their last night in the house they had built together, Aurora and Garrett walked through each room, memories flooding back. Samuel took his first steps right there, Aurora said, pointing to a spot by the fireplace. And you delivered Mrs. Jenkins' twins on this table during that blizzard, Garrett added, running his hand along the kitchen table's smooth surface. So many memories, Aurora murmured, but we're not leaving them behind, are we? We carry them with us. Garrett pulled her into his arms. Along with the most important things we built here, our family, our love, our trust in each other. Dawn broke clear and bright on the day of their departure. 3 wagons stood loaded in the yard, one for their household goods, one for Garrett's equipment and horses, and one fitted comfortably for Aurora and the children. It seemed the entire town had gathered to bid them farewell. There were gifts: a handcrafted quilt from the women's sewing circle, books for the children from the schoolteacher, tools for Garrett from the miners. You'll always have a home here, Mr. Russell said, his voice gruff with emotion. Don't forget that. We won't, Aurora promised, embracing the man who had been like a father to her. And you must visit us when the railroad is complete. It will be a simple day's journey then. As the wagons pulled away, Aurora looked back at the town that had given her a second chance. Miner's Rest had been her salvation when she needed it most, a place of healing, of new beginnings, of love found in the aftermath of rejection. Garrett reached across from his wagon to squeeze her hand. "Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Hayes?" Aurora smiled, feeling not sadness but a profound gratitude for the path that had led them here and excitement for the journey ahead. "As long as we're together," she replied, "I'm ready for anything." The children waved enthusiastically from the wagon, already looking forward rather than back. Aurora took one last glance at Miner's Rest before turning her gaze to the horizon, to Hayes Crossing, to the future they would build there, a future founded on the promise made years ago by a kind-hearted cowboy to a woman in need. "You'll never be alone again." And she never was.